Hello and welcome to the NCSS C3 Collaborative Literacy Professional Development webinar, Lead the Way, Tips and Tools to Introduce, Plan, and Implement the C3 Framework at your school, site, or district. This webinar, along with others in our series, is part of the College, Career, and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies State Standards Literacy Collaborative, C3LC, which NCSS is implementing in collaboration with the National Center for Literacy in Education and which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. My name is Anna Post, and I am the Director of External Relations and Council Communications at NCSS, as well as this grants coordinator. The goal of this C3LC initiative is to create and operationalize a plan designed specifically for social studies teachers to implement the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts by utilizing the C3 framework. To learn more about the C3 Literacy Collaborative and take a look at the resources that have been developed, please visit www.socialstudies.org/C3/C3LC. We are so pleased to have Michelle Herzog and Michael Lavorne doing this presentation today. Michelle is Consultant 3 of History Social Science in the Los Angeles County Office of Education and recently finished her term as NCSS President. Michael is Assistant Professor of Social Studies Education in the Department of Instruction and Learning at the University of Pittsburgh. He is also the President of the National Social Studies Supervisors Association. Without further ado, let me turn over the presentation now to Michelle and Michael.
Welcome, everyone. I want to begin by saying thank you to Michelle and to Anna for their collaborative efforts in making this webinar a possibility. As president of NSSA, this is, of course, important work for us. And from our frame, we are really happy to be a part of this collaborative process. So thank you both to my co-presenters. We welcome all of you, and we are indeed grateful for your time. We know how valuable your time is, and we hope to make the most of it here by engaging you in a focused talk on the C3 framework from the perspective and lens of an administrator. So that's the purpose here. We know that the C3 framework, as many of you know, focuses on a readiness for college and preparation for career, and then an emphasis on civic life. There is much more information of an introductory nature on our websites, and because this webinar is not an introductory webinar, I would invite you to visit the website to find more information and an introduction of these key concepts. Our websites are, as Anna mentioned, socialstudies.org/C3/C3LC. There are also a wealth of materials on c3teachers.org, so you might find those of value and pass them along to your teachers. Now, as I said, this webinar is not an introduction, but to briefly focus our discussion, I will remind each of you that the C3 framework is based on the understanding that students need the intellectual power to recognize and address societal problems and to work together for a common good. And we pursue these necessary skills by fostering and promoting our framework of inquiry. It is this knowledge that guides the development of the inquiry arc, which is a set of interlocking, mutually supportive ideas that frame the way students think about social studies content. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is targeted specifically for administrators and is intended to engage each of you in a discussion on implementation of the C3 framework in your districts and schools. As a reminder, we'll have a follow-up on next Thursday on October 1st, wherein we actually talk about some of the observational protocols. So I invite you to attend that one as well as a continuation of this conversation. Now, Michelle will explain and discuss all of these points that we took from the achievethecore.org framework, but I'm going to highlight the knowledge component. As instructional leaders, it is, of course, your purview to understand the shifts required by the curricular framework and standards. This is also true of the C3 framework. These standards are different from prior standards and fundamentally change what we should think about when we think about standards-based education. And we hope to help you embrace your role as an instructional leader in this way. And we want you to have a good grasp and understanding of the shifts that need to take place to put these into practice. Now, on the next slide, you'll see as instructional leaders, it is critical that to know the major implications of the C3 framework. Without an understanding of what the big picture looks like, every decision and action made to support the implementation will be could be a risk. C3 is relatively new to many in the education community, and as a leader, this is an opportunity for you to not only model quality leadership, but quality learning as well. That process of learning will continue over the next several years. Your learning and leading in this work will likely impact your work for the next 5 years or more. It's imperative that as leaders, you take time now to engage with and learn the standards, beginning with these shifts. Now, we want to emphasize that this is a state-led effort. As you can see from this chart here, we're really happy to have had so many teachers involved, but we have professional organizations, writers, editors, graphic designers, and curricular designers and organizations from around the United States, and we're really happy to have such participation across the country. As a teacher educator, I'm particularly happy to see so many teachers as a part of this developmental process as well. Now, on the next slide, you'll see several of our agencies and organizations of support for C3. We're really proud of this list. As you can see, we have representatives from geography and history, economics, and different government and civics education organizations, and we're happy to have their support and their endorsement for the C3 framework. It is indeed a cross-disciplinary effort, as you can see. We've garnered support from these reputable organizations in an effort to streamline social studies education through the C3 framework. Now, in looking at this next slide, you'll see who our intended audience is. Or certainly the intended audience of the C3 framework are states, and we hope to encourage them to upgrade and to increase the rigor of their social studies standards for our teachers and for our students. We are targeting local school districts, school teachers, and curriculum writers to strengthen their social studies programs. We understand that some states may not be, at the state level, may not be revisiting their standards for several years now, but we still believe that this can help with implementation because we can do it from a grassroots or an on-the-ground level. So that's what we hope to accomplish. Now, the objectives of the C3 are to, of course, enhance the rigor of social studies in all disciplines, as I mentioned, to build critical thinking, problem solving, and participatory skills to become engaged citizens, and to align academic programs to the Common Core state standards for English language arts and literacy and history and social studies. The objective of this webinar there are two objectives actually. Those objectives are to orient administrators to the design, structure, and intent of the framework and to engage them in discussions and activities related to the implementation at that local and district level. Again, let me remind you that we will have another webinar on October 1st to continue this conversation, and I encourage you to take time to join us for that. Anna and Michelle and I have worked hard on that to share with you some observational protocols for administrators when walking into a classroom. So, finally, the ultimate goal of C3, as many of you know, is to frame and facilitate students' development as engaged citizens in the 21st century. We believe that we can best do this if we are prepared and with a sophisticated understanding of the C3 framework, and we are hopeful that this webinar that you're participating in will help advance that for you and for all of your teachers. So with that, I want to say once more welcome, and I want to turn it over to Michelle Herzog.
Okay, thank you, Michael. It was great working with you on this. Before I begin, I just want to reiterate the purpose of this webinar, because as Michael mentioned, it's designed for school administrators. And whether you're watching this live or archived version, If you work in schools, you thoroughly understand all kinds of different models for implementing new strategies and approaches in schools. And we recognize early on that, yes, teachers come forth with lots of great ideas and strategies, but if we want to effectively implement an initiative or any kind of program across a school, it really does require a collaborative effort among school administrators, the community, parents, school board members, and policymakers. So even though this Gates grant was designed specifically to provide classroom teachers with tools, we wanted to recognize and take the opportunity to design a few of these standalone webinars for these other very critical and important audiences. So this one and the October one, very important for school administrators, and we encourage you to share those with principals, directors of curriculum and instruction, assistant superintendents, even school board members. Excuse me. And in that light, we decided it was important to reach out to our associated groups. So that's why I was thrilled to work with Mike, who's serving as president of the National Social Studies Supervisors Association, which speaks to school leaders and administrators of the social studies. And as you know, we've done a couple others with our other group, CS4, an associated group that works primarily with State Department of Education social studies leads. So it's been a nice way to kind of bring everyone together to a common place. So let me go on, and we created some tools. You'll notice too, a lot of them were adapted from Achieve the Core. Any of you as administrators who have been involved in Common Core implementation, and we thoroughly recognize that not all states are involved in that, and even districts within states that have adopted are at different levels of implementation. But I think the attention to give strategic resources and ways to introduce these is critical. So I want to just re-familiarize you a little bit with the 4 dimensions of the inquiry arc, and then share some of the tools that you can use with your school community. As you may know, Dimension 1 is about developing questions and planning inquiries. And as Michael mentioned, if you want a more expensive introduction to the C3, we urge you to go back to the NCSS website and get that. But very quickly, Dimension 1, take any subject that teachers teach in their social studies classroom and twist it to begin it with a really compelling question. So I know school districts across the country teach about the Civil War, they teach about the Civil Rights Movement, the War for Independence. Why not start it with questions such as, was the American Revolution revolutionary? Was the Civil Rights Movement a success? That's a little bit of a shift for some people, and that's what we're urging teachers to think about. Dimension 2, we want then teachers to dig into the content. This is a very content-rich approach, and not just looking at the history, but looking at the civic implications, economic, geographic, making all those prominent, interdisciplinary, and very apparent when you're studying events of the past, the present, and of course, the future. Dimension 3 then, as you know, it's good social studies, always looks at a whole variety of sources, primary, secondary, evidence. We want kids to grapple with all of these, analyze, evaluate. A lot of the historical thinking work is very reflective in Dimension 3, because we ultimately want students to come up with conclusions based on that inquiry question. And finally, Dimension 4, obviously we want students to come up with conclusions, be able to communicate them using academic language in their writing, academic language in their speaking, in their presentations, and applying what they've learned in the real world. And that's what we mean by taking informed action. You know, when they studied the case of Tinker versus Des Moines, there's some powerful learning. Here's a couple kids who expressed their opinions on the Vietnam War. And what was the action? My goodness, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, we don't expect every social studies lesson to end up in the Supreme Court, but we hope that some of the content and topics that students study will have some ideas and concepts that are resonating in today's world when you open up that front page or watch the news. You know, history does seem to repeat itself in a number of ways when we talk about immigration, refugee, all kinds of issues that we are facing, environmental issues, all of that. Okay, so that's a very quick, just to kind of reorient us a little. So when we're introducing this, these are some of the guiding principles of the C3 framework that we are hoping teachers will start to embrace and reflect in their teaching. And we want you as administrators to be aware of this and help teachers in looking for these aspects when you go in and visit classroom, social studies classroom teaching. Is inquiry at the center? Do you see disciplinary integrity and interdisciplinary connections, not only between history, geography, econ, and civics, but connections with English language arts, with reading, writing, listening, and speaking of the Common Core? Maybe connections to science, if your district is using next generation science standards. Are you seeing in students taking informed action or applying what they're learning in a relevant way, where they're applying what they learn in the social studies class to issues today? And are you seeing this inquiry arc as an instructional arc in the classroom? Is this framing how teachers are teaching and how students are learning? So when you walk into a C3 classroom, it may look a little different than a traditional social studies classroom. It certainly would look different than the ones I went to in high school. And if you, maybe you experienced too, where, we had a lot of lecture, note taking, test on Friday. Of course, now we see a lot of lecturing, PowerPoint, note taking, test on Friday. We want to change that frame of teaching and learning to be more engaging and interactive, as Michael as Michael described. Okay, so how do you enter into these discussions if you want to lead this initiative with teachers at your site? So here's an activity, for example, that we created. It's a discussion guide, because as we saw, the first phase of implementation is establishing that common knowledge base of the C3 and reflecting on current practices that you're currently doing. So if you look in the documents portion, reference documents portions of this webcast, you will see a C3 discussion guide in Word doc form that you can download and use with teachers. You can also find it on the NCSS site when this is archived as well. That should be very accessible for you. And basically what this handout is, it walks through some questions, same kinds of questions that we work with teachers on for implementing Common Core through the Achieve the Core website, with permission to be able to adapt it. So first of all, once you establish this knowledge base for teachers on what the C3 is and what it isn't, you would ask them to contemplate some of these questions and discuss what's the current prevailing practice we are seeking to improve upon. Is there anything we're seeking to shift away from? Now, this is kind of tricky stuff when you're leading these discussions, because I don't know anybody in any type of work who wants someone coming in and saying, okay, I know you've been doing a good job. I want you to throw all that out the window and start over. Okay, that's not very motivating, let alone validating of good work that has happened. So we want to gently ask people, is this a shift? For some, it will be. For others, not so much. Maybe some aspects, maybe not others. So we want to have this as an opportunity to reflect. Asking teachers, do these shifts make sense to them? What resonates about them for them in good practice? What might they say, look, and see as good priorities? Is there research, rationale, evidence that convinces you to make some of these shifts? There's a lot of attention now supporting the use of inquiry-based instruction. We're seeing it in Common Core. We're seeing it in next generation science standards. Why not see this in social studies too? And so aligning this across a school, I think, makes really good sense. Are there other shifts that might be in contention? Why or why not? So these are some good questions. Other questions on this form. What kind of evidence would you want to see that represents shifts, that demonstrates to you that shifts are happening? How might we collect such evidence? Right? Because it's one thing to say, yeah, I do that, but can you point to the evidence? And we're seeing this kind of approach all over the place with Common Core in all kinds of places. How can the shifts be reflected in different as separate domains of teaching frameworks? Are there other ways to articulate and communicate expectations? So if we truly want this to be a collaborative initiative with all of our stakeholders, we want to have, hopefully you've established a culture in your school to have some of these frank, revealing conversations and reflections. If you're used to using professional learning communities, this type of format should look and feel very familiar to you. Okay. Finally, what would be needed for principals and teachers and all folks to deeply understand, embrace, and integrate the shifts? Are there resources they may need? Are there other experiences they might want to draw on? You know, when you can have a rich collaborative conversation with other teachers in a room, it's wonderful what trickles out of that. You'll have a teacher who says, oh my goodness, I've been using historical thinking from Sam Weinberg for some time. What a great place in dimension 3 that I can strengthen. Another teacher may not have knowledge of it. It's a great way to share and move forward in that. Okay, so hopefully this discussion guide might help you as an administrator guide, just as it says, guide discussion at your site. From there, as Michael mentioned, we want to move to the vision place. How do we bring about a school-wide vision of what we want to achieve? All right. What is the vision of college career and citizenship readiness? I know there's been a lot of conversation in defining what that really is and how to measure it. We want to be careful, of course. We don't want it to be one more thing piled on. And what's interesting that with all this focus on college and career readiness, we are learning that many of the knowledge pieces and skill pieces that speak to that are also very applicable to preparing kids for civic life. I mean, let's face it, to think critically, to look at multiple points of view, to work in teams, to come up with conclusions. That prepares kids for college success, for career, and of course as good citizens. And the decisions you make as leaders are also filtered through some of these shifts. The question will beg, all right, once we get our head around this, how are we going to assess it? How are we going to find and identify resources and evidence? What will you look for when you go in and observe classrooms? And I'm excited to be working with Michael because on the October 1, he's going to talk about observational protocols that you might want to employ when you go in and observe. What resources do you currently have? Money, time, energy. Let's look at the existing policies and procedures. Do you have time dedicated and resources for professional development for teachers? How can that be used to help teachers understand and implement some of the C3 work? And of course, let's never forget our students with special needs, our students who are English learners, who are coming to school with a number of issues that may be challenges to fully embracing the context of the C3 framework. So here's another question. What policies, procedures, and our work within your district classroom are impacted or could be impacted by this? That's an important question to ask yourself as a school leader. Okay? When we move on, of course, as you know, elephant in the room is always assessment, but assessment to improve teaching and learning. Not as a gotcha, but how can we gather evidence to really inform instructional practices? What might those metrics look like? What's going to be involved? They obviously have to be connected to the vision. Everyone around the table should have a common understanding and be clear about the goals. They should let these metrics, however you're going to measure success, is going to let us know what progress is being made in meeting those goals, and of course to inform instruction to constantly monitor and adjust. We have to keep in mind, teachers come to us in a whole variety of knowledge base, practical experience. Teachers come and go inside of schools. Some are teaching things with deep knowledge, some not so much. How much experience in the classroom, what teacher ed program they went to, all of that, and working with teachers is all over the map. Okay, so those are things we want to look for. So here's just an example of some metrics that have been used for English language arts and mathematics when we look at classroom materials, resources, kind of going down in the grains, drilling down in the grain size to look at different things. At some point, you're going to want to think about developing metrics for the C3 framework. And to help you in that discussion, we created another handout for you, and you could drop that down. It's called Getting to Measurable, Meaningful Metrics to Clarify Evidence of Success. And basically, if you look at that form, it talks about these things. What would you be able to see in a social studies classroom 5 years from now? What would be your vision for that? What would you be able to observe a year from now? What evidence might you collect? How you're going to collect it, when you're going to collect it, and what needs to be in place. These are all things to be thinking about in the long term. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. Before we go on to building capacity, I want to pause for a moment and see if there's anyone who is on the live webinar now who'd like to post any questions or ideas they may have. Feel free to enter into the chat box you should see on your screen. Or if you've already been working along some of these lines as a school leader, share some of your experiences you've had thus far. Maybe some successes and maybe some of the roadblocks you've come across. Here's Carolyn, who's teaching undergrad teachers developing lesson plans. That's a great place to start. I was teaching a methods course myself last semester, and it's really interesting to include these teacher ed students early on. I agree. Oh, yes. Illinois, on the verge of adopting the new standards. Yes. I thought that had just recently happened. In fact, that's a huge success story for us. And we just learned that Hawaii, I think last week, has adopted the C3 framework. Connecticut they don't have state standards. They have a state framework that they have updated that is purely reflective of the C3, so we count that. New York State has done amazing work. They have a number of terrific lesson plans, C3 lesson plans available on c3teachers.org, I believe is the site. And those are great for teachers because they want to see examples. So yes. Okay, and here's Stan Masters commenting. Metrics to be collected need to include student growth measures of skills. Exactly. And he comments, the C3 provides language for building learning progressions and student learning outcome guidelines. God, thank you, Stan. I'm glad you see that, and you're finding the relevance of that in this conversation. That's terrific. There's Connecticut, Mary Hannah, yes, and how lucky to have Steve Armstrong there, another NCSS past president at the State Department. Okay, and here's somebody in Hawaii. Wow, Carolyn, we got people all over the country. Terrific. Social studies education was exceptional, and we're so thrilled we have Rosanna Fukuda leading the charge there at the Hawaii Department of Ed. Okay, terrific. Thanks for sharing this, everybody. This is bolstering our work as well. Let me go on a little bit, but keep posting your comments. Joanne is asking, the website for lesson plans, there we go, Susan Griffin, right at the ready, c3teachers.org, exactly. And I do understand that at the website Mike just posted, our NCSS one, there is another webcast there that I produced for NCSS called Create Your Own C3 Lessons. And it shows how you can create step-by-step using a lesson plan template to align or adjust a lesson to be C3 friendly. There also should be posted there, I don't believe it's there now, but should be the lesson plan templates as well. So look for that. If not, email me, we could send that to you too. So we're working fast and furious to get as many materials out as possible. So let me go on and share a couple other resources for school leaders, and as we move into this area of building capacity, because as you know, you can get your whole team ready to go, nose to the grindstone, moving forward, and fantastic. But you know, in working in schools, the ship changes all the time. Teachers leave, new teachers come out, come in, you get new administrators, you get new things. It takes dedicated work to keep that capacity and build it long after you've done the intro. And that's what this section here is about on building capacity. Um, and being the lead learner, you as administrator sends a strong signal to teachers. We're all learning this together. We're keeping it going. We're committed to staying current and improving our work more and more. We don't want to see this as a compliance issue, but we want more and more opportunities to learn and process. You know, it's so sad to me. I was with some teachers over the weekend, fabulous teachers, teacher leaders, teachers of the year. And some of them admitted to me, you know, Michelle, I don't think the people at my school like me. They feel like, you know, I'm doing all this great stuff and it's a threat to them. And that's sad because if a culture of a school, if a school environment is set up where people feel they can share ideas, where they can be vulnerable, where they can take risks, you don't have that superstar teacher feeling like they're all by themselves. And you don't have the teacher who's struggling feel like they're by themselves with no support. So, as you know, building that culture at your school is so important. Um, and of course, recognizing everyone's hard work, that hard work is worth doing, particularly when we can share and be supportive of each other. This is another graphic which I think is really interesting. And again, Achieve the Core, I want to give them the credit because you know we have to go through this process if we want to really effectively implement an initiative. And just as we're laying it out here, you got to go through the awareness phase. What is it? Get my head around this. Transition phase. Start to tinker with it. Play around with it a little bit. Delve into implementation. And so you've tried it, you've tested it, it looks good, but you can't stop there. We have to work toward this continuous improvement piece. And so this is nothing new. Anyone in schools been involved in this type of work knows that the leadership is key in keeping everyone's eye on the prize. What happens too, very common, is you have people entering and exiting throughout these phases. You could have your whole school, like I mentioned, down in implementation and continuous improvement, and you get 6 new teachers the next year and you got to start over with them with awareness. So how do you make sure that happens and that is supported? And so we've done another handout for you, and you can download this one on building capacity for the work to help understand where different individuals are and where they are in the implementation phase. So I encourage you to pull that down and take a look at that as well. Furthermore, we get to the final stage, and this is that continuous improvement stage, which is keeping engaged, keeping in mind that the work is developing, and to be these ongoing learners in this work. And we've developed a form, a worksheet to help you guide those conversations called Reflecting on Actions to help plan your next steps. And you can find that downloadable as well. All right. And so I hope you can take some time to look at these forms. The beauty of having them as Word docs is you're welcome to change them, adjust them, meet the needs of your individual schools. You know, sometimes terminology is different from school to school or district to district. Feel free. And like I said, these are all great practices that have come out of Achieve the Core that many schools and districts are using in their efforts to implement Common Core state standards. I think they're applicable to all kinds of different initiatives that we want to do to improve schools. Okay, what do we want? Oh, okay, obviously we want you to stay engaged. We want everyone to stay engaged. We want to unleash the potential of that C3 framework. We are working very hard, like as I mentioned, with NSSA, CS4, our professional organizations. All those groups you saw Mike reference on the task force are just phenomenal. We know that some of our publishers, including McGraw-Hill and others, are starting to align their textbooks to the C3. Constitutional Rights Foundation is making alignments to C3 and connections. All of this is helping us really give the credibility and integrity to the work to point to things. And of course, we can't say enough about the leadership we're seeing at various states across the nation. I know the more I've done work with schools, the more I've become convinced that if you really want to be effective in implementing new things, you got to have a ground up, but you got to have a top down, a whole total view. When you've got on the ground teachers working with administrators and policymakers, you've got the perfect recipe for making things move in a forward way. And let's not forget to keep our parents and community members involved in this conversation too. That's a critical piece because they are our ultimate clients as well. When those kids come home from school with homework or assignments or ideas that parents don't understand or can't get their head around, obviously communication to those groups are very, very critical indeed. And so obviously at some point, once you as leaders understand the shifts or potential shifts, you understand deeply the implications for instruction and the resources that are needed, you want to engage, like I mentioned, all of these groups to really be on the same page. Because the last thing you want is to feel like you're getting something from out in left field that could become an obstacle to the work that you're trying to do. Okay? And here again, just to remind you, we urge you all to go to the National Council for Social Studies, socialstudies.org/C3. There's just a plethora of things there, webcasts, sample lessons, a whole long list of webinars, standalone webinars such as this, and deeper dives we'll talk about too. We started here at my office at the Los Angeles County Office of Education, did an introductory webcast and have lesson plan templates and things. This is a web page that I was able to create in my office. You can go there and pull things down. So we're very excited. There's no shortage of resources. Now we're kind of at the phase of how do we be strategic in introducing these to schools and school communities in ways that make sense for them. So please don't forget to go to socialstudies.org/C3 as your one-stop shop, and then you can go from there. Okay, so here's a question from Joan. Wants to know when all of these handouts and things that we've been walking through very quickly will be available online. I know that Anna is very involved in archiving these webinars and posting these documents as well. So I'll wait for her to respond. I see she's typing an answer for us. Hopefully we'll have a date for that. A couple of other things. I told you how we're reaching out. So on September 23rd, I believe we have Kathy Swan and John Lee is going to do one on what every methods teacher should know about the C3. We got to bring them in the loop, absolutely. And then again on October 1st, Mike and I will return, and Mike will go more into depth with some practical tools and talk about observational protocols for you as administrators when you walk in. Okay, Anna's telling us that the archiving is taking about 10 business days. Oh my goodness. So come back and check that, and we'll have that all ready for you as well. Okay. We also want to make this point. As you start introducing this to teachers, we know that you want to give them opportunities to do a deep dive into some of these ideas, particularly when some of these C3 principles represent shifts. So thanks to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we have been able to create a number of investigations, as we term them, which do allow teachers to go deeply into these various pieces and components. Okay? So you want to see how C3 connects to informational text. You can go to that website listed there at the bottom, socialstudies.org/C3/C3LC, create a group, create some PLCs in your schools, give people time to go back and forth through these various steps and ideas to take that deep dive. This is high quality professional development available for you for free online. Right? It's one thing to sit through a 1 hour webcast, which most people is a long time to sit through for folks. But if you truly want to engage them in this hard work, go deep, please, please send your folks, give them dedicated professional development time as part of their day to go into these investigations. And because there's such a large menu of those, they can handpick which ones will be more relevant for them. We want to see thousands of teachers take advantage of that. And so we're looking forward to that. Okay. All right, and so you'll be able to download all kinds of documents, I would say right now, from the reference page here. All right, and here's Anna also saying if you want those emailed to you, she can do that too. All right, so let me pause for a moment. I believe that's our last slide. For any comments or questions from any of you in the audience. And please take this time to share some of the things you've done that you have found to be effective in the work that you're doing and moving forward. And let me invite Mike to chime in if he wants to unmute. And Mike, do you have any other comments or suggestions in the work you're seeing with administrators?
As a work in progress, I encourage everybody, of course, to join us on October 1st to talk about some of those observational protocols. And I am also, and I believe it was one of our participants earlier had mentioned, working with future teachers. That's what I do. I teach at Pitt. I'm in the methods. I teach methods to secondary social studies teachers. And what I do is utilize the C3 in every imaginable way possible. So I'll be excited to hear how other methods instructors are doing. So I have my students actually, there's a section on my backward design that I have my students develop their lesson plans where they identify and highlight their C3 framework components. And they like it. They think it's very streamlined and sleek. Then when lesson planning is never fun, but when we do it, we enjoy seeing this continuity, I think. And the past 2 years I've had my students doing that. It's been really effective. And so I would encourage you to join us on next Thursday when we do our next one, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the administrators might see as they come into the classroom, what you all might see your teachers doing, and how those components might then be observed and reflected upon. So join us.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up. So let me thank Mike. It's great working with NSSA, and we're going to have some featured sessions at the conference there on C3. Thank you, Anna, for setting us up with everything and getting our webinar up and going. And I just want to wish you all best of luck. Keep engaged. Keep us involved. Let us hear what you're doing, how we can help you, and how you can help us as we move forward to prepare all our young people for college, career, and civic life.